After her husband's death, his parents cruelly took her home and left her with nothing. But the next move of the Black Widow shocked everyone. Remember to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. For Alice, this home was more than just bricks and walls. It was her sanctuary, the place where she and John had crafted their lives together. As Alice sat on the sofa, her fingers gently touched the border of an old photo frame on the coffee table. Inside, a photo displayed her and John on their wedding day. Her rich brown skin shone against the delicate white lace of her dress. John stood next to her, his arms securely wrapped around her waist, his pale blue eyes beaming with pride and love. They both flashed radiant smiles, a bold statement against the critical glares they had faced. Alice shut her eyes, allowing the memories to transport her back to the start of their tale, which began unexpectedly at a lively charity event in the city's core. Alice had been volunteering as part of an outreach program for disadvantaged children. Coordinating the event, she was busy setting up chairs and directing volunteers when she spotted him, a tall, light-skinned man with a welcoming smile that brightened the room. John had attended as a sponsor, but rather than socialize with other patrons, he had assisted Alice with carrying boxes of supplies. By night's end, they had swapped phone numbers. Their bond was immediate, as though they had known each other in a past life. Over the ensuing weeks and months, they found common interests, a love for soulful music, a zeal for social justice, and a vision to build a home of warmth and compassion. John cherished Alice's sharp mind and kind heart, while she valued his steadfast optimism and bravery in confronting societal norms. However, not everyone viewed their love in the same light. John's family, a well-known white family from a conservative suburb, disapproved vehemently. But to criticize, Alice vividly remembered the first time she met them. His mother, Mary, had greeted her with a tight-lipped smile that failed to reach her eyes, while his father, Richard, gave only a curt nod. The atmosphere was chilly, and Alice felt the full weight of the judgment emanating from their stony glares. It didn't take long for their disdain to surface in words. Mary would remark on Alice's hair, her background, and even the way she spoke, all under the pretense of polite conversation. Richard's disapproval was more subtle but equally sharp. He would ignore Alice's views at the dinner table, speaking over her as if she wasn't present. However, the worst of them was John's brother, Dan. Unlike their parents, Dan made no attempt to hide his racism. He would openly ridicule Alice, making crude jokes and calling her John's experiment. Family gatherings turned into a minefield, each visit leaving Alice exhausted and questioning whether their love was worth the constant struggle. John, however, was unwavering. He defended Alice at every opportunity, confronting his family's prejudices and refusing to accept their behavior. "If you can't respect her, you can't respect me," he declared during one particularly intense argument. It was a definitive statement, one that strained his relationship with his family to its limits. Their wedding marked the pinnacle of their defiance. It was a modest ceremony, attended by close friends and a few of Alice's family members. John's family had boycotted the event, declaring it a mistake they would not support. Standing at the altar beneath a canopy of shimmering fairy lights, Alice and John vowed to love and protect each other, come what may. It was the most joyful day of her life. The years that ensued were a mix of happiness and challenges. They purchased the small house in the suburbs, where they spent endless evenings cooking together, dancing in the kitchen to their favorite Motown records, and dreaming about the future. They had discussed starting a family, but life always intervened. Instead, they dedicated their energy to their community, volunteering and supporting causes close to their hearts. Yet, even within their sanctuary, the shadow of John's family lingered. Mary and Richard would occasionally call, not to make amends, but to continue their criticism. Throughout it all, John and Alice clung to each other, their connection deepening with every obstacle they faced. Then, the day came that changed everything. It began with John displaying mild symptoms, complaining about exhaustion and a persistent cough that lingered. Initially, Alice dismissed it as stress or a minor illness, but as his condition deteriorated, she persuaded him to visit a doctor. The diagnosis struck them like a freight train: late stage cancer. The words reverberated in her mind, each one cutting deeply. In the ensuing months, their lives turned into a whirlwind of hospital appointments, treatment sessions, and sleepless nights. Alice picked up extra shifts at her job to manage the soaring medical bills, all while caring for John and keeping up their home. Her once vibrant and strong husband grew increasingly frail with each day, yet his spirit remained resilient even as his body succumbed. Throughout this ordeal, John was her pillar of strength. He would hold her hand and share stories, his voice unwavering even through intense pain. "You're my strength," he would say, his eyes brimming with love. Alice managed a smile, masking her own heartache. As Alice opened her eyes and returned the photo frame to the table, she inhaled deeply. The house was silent, eerily so, but it remained hers, a testament to the life and love she and John had shared. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was determined to honor his legacy and preserve the sanctuary they had created together. The hospital room felt cold and impersonal, filled with the soft buzz of machines that monitored John's every breath. Alice sat by his bed, her hand tenderly stroking his frail, trembling hand. The man who once danced with her in their kitchen, his laughter resonating through the room, was now just a shadow of his former self. His complexion was pallid, tightly drawn over his cheekbones, and his once bright blue eyes now appeared dimmed by the severity of his condition. Since John's diagnosis 6 months prior, each day had been a relentless fight. Chemotherapy, radiation, and countless tests seemed futile in stopping the cancer's aggressive progression. Alice had adapted to her new role seamlessly, balancing her nursing shifts with being John's full-time caregiver. Her days were filled with preparing meals, administering medications, and enduring long hours of treatments. She barely found time to rest. Yet she never complained. Her profound love for John fueled her resilience. However, John's concern grew day by day, not for himself, but for her. One evening, as Alice adjusted his blanket, he placed a weak hand over hers. "You've done enough, Alice," he whispered, his voice frail, but was determined to fulfill his wish. "You're wearing yourself out," John said firmly, his voice filled with concern. Alice shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm not leaving, John. You're my husband, and taking care of you is what I'm here for." His attempt at a smile seemed more like a grimace. "I know, but you can't keep this up. Promise me you'll take some rest." Alice didn't respond with words. Instead, she leaned in and kissed his forehead, her tears quietly falling onto his skin. As the weeks passed, John's family remained noticeably absent. Mary and Richard had made a brief appearance early on, their visit feeling more obligatory than supportive. They sat rigidly, their glances nervously shifting towards the machines that encircled John. Mary had commented on Alice's weary appearance with a tone laden with passive aggression, while Richard was virtually silent. Following that visit, they hadn't returned, though Mary occasionally called to inquire about John's condition, each conversation ending with a subtle probe into his financial matters. Dan, as expected, was even less present, only making his presence felt through occasional vitriolic posts online about how John was squandering his life. Despite his family's absence, John had one pressing matter on his mind: securing Alice's future. Late one night, as the city outside buzzed energetically, John's voice, though barely a whisper, carried a determined tone. "Alice, we need to talk about the house," he began, his eyes locked on hers. Alice frowned. "The house, John? I don't want to talk about that now." "We have to," he insisted. "I don't trust them. You know they'll come for it when I'm gone." Alice's heart tightened at his words, disliking the way he spoke as if his departure was a foregone conclusion, though she knew, deep down, it was. Recognizing the seriousness in his voice, she nodded. John laid out his plan to transfer the house and all his assets into her name. "I've already spoken to the lawyer," he continued. "Everything will be finalized before I'm discharged. That way, they can't touch anything." Alice wanted to argue, to say that none of it mattered as long as they were together, but she knew better. This was John's way of protecting her, of making sure she could maintain the life they had built together. So she nodded, her voice barely audible. "Okay, whatever you think is best." In the days that followed, John's condition worsened. His body couldn't withstand the illness's toll any longer. Alice was ever present by his side, reading to him, holding his hand, and whispering words of love and reassurance. She barely slept, fearful that closing her eyes might cause her to miss his final moments. Then, during one quiet afternoon, John turned to her with a weak smile. "Alice," he said, his voice shaky, "how much time do you think we've spent together?" Caught off guard by the question, Alice responded, 15 years, adding softly, "Not nearly enough." He chuckled faintly. "It feels like both a lifetime and just a moment." Alice's throat tightened, and she struggled to hold back tears. "Stop," she pleaded. "Don't talk like that." But John shook his head. "We have to face it, Alice. I don't have much time left." For the first time since his diagnosis, Alice felt the overwhelming tide of grief wash over her. She buried her face in his chest, her cries muffled against the fabric of his hospital gown. John wrapped his arms around her as best as he could, his own tears silently blending into her hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Alice pulled back to look into his eyes. "Don't you dare apologize. You've given me more love and happiness than I ever imagined possible." In the following days, John made one final request. "I want to go home," he told Alice. "I don't want to spend my last moments in this hospital." Alice hesitated, aware of the risks, but resolved to grant his wish. But she also recognized the profound significance it held for him. After consulting with his doctor, they coordinated his discharge. Alice prepared everything meticulously. His favorite chair was positioned by the window, soft blankets were draped over the couch, and all his medications were organized neatly in the living room. When John returned home, it felt as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He spent his last days in the comfort of their shared life, with Alice by his side throughout. One evening, as the sun set, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John clasped Alice's hand. "Promise me one thing," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Anything," she responded. "Keep talking to me every day, even when I'm gone." "I'll hear you," he said. Alice nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise." John passed away the next morning, his hand still clasped in hers. The house, once alive with his laughter, now felt unbearably quiet. Despite her grief, Alice clung to his last words, vowing to honor the life they had built together. The silence in the house was oppressive, pressing against Alice's chest like a physical weight. The air felt heavy, saturated with the absence of John's laughter, his voice, and the familiar sounds of his daily routines. Even the furniture seemed to grieve, especially the well-worn armchair by the window, now sitting empty, its cushions slightly sunken from where John used to rest. Alice sat at the dining table, staring blankly at the stack of papers before her. Death certificates, medical bills, and the finalized will John had meticulously prepared to protect her. The reality of his passing was setting in, yet it felt impossible to accept. Just days before, his hand had been warm in hers. Now, that warmth was replaced only by the memory of it. The responsibility of arranging the funeral fell entirely on Alice. John's family, predictably, offered no assistance. Mary, his mother, called once, not to console, but to criticize Alice for choosing a ceremony she deemed too modest. "John deserved something grand," she said condescendingly, as if Alice hadn't already given everything to honor him properly. The funeral was held on a cool autumn afternoon in a small chapel, one that John had admired for its simple beauty. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues filled the pews, their presence a testament to the kind, generous, and deeply loved man John had been. Alice sat in the front row, clutching a white rose, her heart heavy with grief but grateful for the support of those who truly cared. Toward the back of the chapel, John's family arrived late, their presence more of a performance than a genuine act of mourning. Mary wore a dark, expensive suit and carried herself with an air of superiority, while Richard's expression remained stoic. Dan, as expected, did not bother to disguise his contempt, leaning against the wall with crossed arms, his eyes scanning the room with a sneer. During the eulogy, Alice spoke of John's kindness, his love for life, and his unwavering belief in justice. Her voice trembled but did not break, even as tears streamed down her face. She concluded her speech with a promise to honor John's memory by continuing to live as he had taught her, with courage, love, and integrity. After the service, as people gathered outside the chapel to offer their condolences, Alice found herself enveloped by friends and neighbors. Their words and embraces served as a balm to her aching heart, reminding her of the community that John and she had cherished and nurtured together. Into the threshold, her presence as imposing as ever. "We're not leaving until we sort this out," she stated, her tone uncompromising. Alice stood her ground in the doorway, the folder of documents clutched tightly in her hand. "The house and everything in it was legally left to me by John," she declared, her voice firm despite the tremor of emotion. "This document you have is a forgery, and I won't be intimidated." Dan scoffed, his eyes gleaming with malice. "We'll see about that," he sneered, taking a step closer. "The courts will decide, won't they?" Richard, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke, his voice cold and calculated. "Consider this your final warning, Alice. Leave now, and perhaps we can avoid dragging this through the mud." Alice's resolve hardened. She knew the truth and the strength of the legal documents John had left. "I'm not going anywhere," she responded, her stance unwavering. "This was John's wish, and I intend to honor it." Seeing that Alice was not going to back down, Mary's expression turned sour. "You'll regret this," she hissed as she turned, signaling for her sons to follow her off the porch. Their departure was grudging and slow, filled with resentful glares. Once the door was securely locked behind them, Alice let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The confrontation had drained her, but it also reinforced her determination to fight for her rights and for John's legacy. She spent the afternoon reviewing every legal detail with Mr. Miller over the phone. They discussed their strategy for proving the authenticity of the original will and discrediting the forged document. Mr. Miller was confident, reassuring her that the evidence was on her side and that the justice system would see the truth. As evening approached, Alice reflected on the day's events. She was alone, yet not isolated, bolstered by the support of friends and the legal counsel she trusted. The house around her felt more like a fortress now, a symbol of her resilience and the love she and John had shared. Determined more than ever, Alice prepared for the coming legal battle. She organized her documents, penned down her memories and interactions with John about the house, and made notes on what to discuss further with her lawyer. Her love for John and her respect for his wishes were her guiding lights. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the windows, Alice felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead might be fraught with challenges, but she was ready to defend her home and honor the man she loved. With every fiber of her being, she believed in the cause for which she was fighting, and she was prepared to see it through to the end, no matter the obstacles. Alice nodded, taking in every word with a grim determination. "I'm ready for whatever comes," she affirmed, her resolve unshaken despite the looming challenge. "John trusted me to protect what we built together, and I won't let him down." Mr. Miller spent some more time with Alice, going over the legal strategies they would employ and reinforcing the robustness of their case. "You have the truth on your side, and the law backs you up," he reassured her. "We'll make sure that the court sees through their deception." As Mr. Miller left, he gave Alice a supportive pat on the shoulder. "Call me any time, day or night, if you need to talk or if they show up again," he said, emphasizing his commitment to her case. That night, Alice couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The house seemed larger and emptier without John, and now the added pressure of the legal battle made her feel even more isolated. However, her spirits were lifted slightly by the supportive messages and calls from friends and neighbors who had heard about the confrontation. Their words of encouragement and offers of help were a balm to her troubled heart. She spent the evening in John's study, surrounded by his books and personal items, which brought her a sense of closeness to him. There, amidst his things, she found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She reviewed the legal documents once more, ensuring she understood every detail. She made notes, jotting down memories and instances where John had explicitly stated his intentions regarding his assets and his trust in her. The next morning, Alice woke with a sense of purpose. She prepared a small area in the living room where she set up all the documents and evidence they had, creating a makeshift command center for the upcoming legal battle. She was not just fighting for the house or the material possessions within it. She was fighting for her right to honor John's memory and to uphold his last wishes. As the days passed, Alice grew more accustomed to the rhythm of her new life, balancing her time between managing the house, speaking with Mr. Miller, and keeping in touch with her support network. Despite the challenges, she found solace in her daily routines, which included long walks in the garden John had loved and tending to the plants they had nurtured together. The legal proceedings began, and Alice stood firm through every meeting and court appearance. Richard, Mary, and Dan were persistent, but as the case unfolded, it became clear that their claims were baseless. The judge was thorough and fair, and after reviewing all the evidence, he ruled in Alice's favor, validating John's will that left everything to her. The victory in court was bittersweet. Alice felt relieved that the matter was settled and that she could finally move on, but the familial rift that had widened into a chasm was painful. She knew that John would have been devastated by the turn of events, yet proud of her for standing up for what was right. In the end, Alice found peace in knowing that she had done everything in her power to honor John's legacy. The house remained her sanctuary, a testament to their love and the life they had shared. She continued to live there, cherishing the memories and continuing to make the home a place of warmth and welcome, just as John had always wanted. "That we all stand with you. You're not alone in this fight, and John would be proud of how strong you are being." Mrs. Henderson's kindness was a small beacon of hope in the storm that Alice was weathering. Alice thanked her, touched by the gesture. "It means so much to know I have your support. It's been a tough time, but I won't back down," she replied, her voice firm yet filled with emotion. The neighborhood's solidarity was a comfort to Alice as the court date approached. She knew that the battle ahead would be challenging, but the community's support bolstered her spirits and resolve. The night before the hearing, Alice reviewed her evidence one last time. She organized the legal documents, personal letters from John, financial records, witness statements, and even the threatening letters into a comprehensive file. Each piece was a testament to her life with John and his clear intentions for his estate. The morning of the hearing, Alice rose early, dressed carefully, and looked at herself in the mirror. She saw a woman ready to defend her rights and her husband's wishes. As she drove to the courthouse, her mind was clear, focused on the task ahead. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. John's family sat on one side, their expressions a mix of defiance and anger. Alice took her place on the other side, Mr. Miller by her side, ready to present their case. The proceedings began, and Mr. Miller was methodical and precise in his arguments. He presented the authentic will and the supporting documents that demonstrated John's clear intent. The handwriting expert testified, discrediting the fraudulent will Dan had produced. Alice's neighbors and John's colleagues gave heartfelt statements about her character and her relationship with John, which painted a vivid picture of their shared life and mutual respect. When it was Alice's turn to speak, she stood, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "John was not just my husband. He was my partner in every sense of the word. Everything we built together. His wishes were clear, and it's my duty to honor them," she stated, holding back tears. As the family's lawyer attempted to argue, the lack of credible evidence and the overwhelming testimonies supporting Alice made their case crumble. The judge took note of the inconsistencies in their claims and the solid evidence presented by Alice. After deliberation, the judge ruled in favor of Alice, affirming that the legitimate will that left everything to her was the one to be executed. The fraudulent document was dismissed, and the judge condemned the actions of John's family, citing them as deceitful and malicious. Relief washed over Alice as the verdict was announced. It was a vindication of her rights and a tribute to her husband's memory. The courtroom slowly emptied, and Alice felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had won the battle, but more importantly, she had protected John's legacy. As she left the courthouse, Alice was met with smiles and congratulations from her neighbors and friends who had come to support her. Their presence was a reminder that while the journey had been arduous, she had never been alone. Alice drove home, the sunset casting long shadows over the road, mirroring the mixed emotions within her. Sorrow for the family she could never reconcile with, but also peace in knowing she had done right by John. Her home, once a shared sanctuary with her husband, awaited her, now fully, rightfully hers. In the days that followed, Alice focused on rebuilding her life, forever carrying John's love and the community's support in her heart, but also his profound love and respect for Alice. It underscores his deliberate choice to ensure that she is taken care of and that his wishes are honored. The judge listened intently, nodding as Mr. Miller spoke. He then turned to Mary's lawyer, his voice firm. "Is there any rebuttal to this evidence?" Mary's lawyer hesitated, his case unraveling with each piece of substantial proof presented by Mr. Miller. "Your Honor, while we respect the emotional weight of the letter, we must consider the legal aspects," he argued weakly. Mr. Miller was quick to respond. "Your Honor, the emotional intent of my client's late husband is directly tied to the legal aspects. It's clear from all angles, both emotional and legal, that John intended for Alice to inherit everything. The documents we've presented are not only legally binding, but also reflect his true and clear intentions." As the hearing continued, the evidence overwhelmingly supported Alice. The judge eventually called for a brief recess before making his final decision. During the break, Alice felt a mix of anticipation and relief. She looked over at her neighbors and friends in the courtroom, their faces showing support and hope. When the court reconvened, the judge took his time before delivering the verdict. After reviewing all the evidence and the testimonies presented, "It is clear that the will brought forth by the defendants is a forgery," he announced. "The document presented by Ms. Thompson is the valid will, and it clearly states her as the sole beneficiary." The courtroom erupted in a muted cheer from Alice's side, while Mary, Richard, and Dan sat in stunned silence. The judge continued, "I find it particularly disheartening that members of the deceased's family would go to such lengths to distort his true wishes. This court respects the sanctity of one's final testament, especially when it is as well documented as Mr. Thompson's." Alice felt a profound sense of relief wash over her as the judge concluded. Therefore, the court rules in favor of Alice Thompson. The estate of John Thompson is to remain in her possession as per the terms of the legitimate will. As the courtroom cleared, Mr. Miller congratulated Alice with a warm handshake. "You stood strong, Alice. John would have been proud," he said. Alice thanked him, feeling a mix of sorrow for the family strife and joy for the justice served. She exited the courthouse with her friends and neighbors, their faces bright with victory. They promised to celebrate properly once everything settled down, but for Alice, the real celebration was the quiet reaffirmation of her husband's love and trust. That evening, as she returned to the home she had fought so hard to protect, Alice felt John's presence stronger than ever. She knew that the road ahead would have its challenges, but with the love and support of her community, and the clear conscience of honoring her husband's wishes, she felt ready to face whatever came next. In the sanctuary of her home, surrounded by memories and the palpable legacy of her husband's love, Alice finally allowed herself to truly grieve and then heal, knowing she had done right by John and could now look forward to rebuilding her life in peace. But rather a somber reflection on the consequences of greed and deceit. As she processed the information, Alice felt a mixture of pity and relief. Pity for the family that had unraveled under the weight of their own actions, and relief that justice had been served, protecting her and John's legacy. The impact of the trial resonated throughout the community, serving as a stark reminder of the importance of integrity and the repercussions of attempting to subvert someone's final wishes. Alice found that her victory had not only secured her home, but had also bolstered her standing in the neighborhood. People respected her resilience and the dignified manner in which she handled the ordeal. Her home became a symbol of her strength and John's enduring love. Days turned into weeks, and Alice used this time to further solidify her life in the home she had fought so hard to protect. She renovated parts of the house, making small changes that John had always talked about, but they had never gotten around to. Each stroke of the paintbrush and each new fixture was a tribute to John and the life they had planned together. Alice also became more involved in her community, channeling her energies into positive endeavors. She started a small scholarship fund in John's name for local students pursuing careers in fields that he had been passionate about, like engineering and the arts. The fund was met with great enthusiasm and support from the community, further cementing John's legacy in a meaningful way. Her evenings were often spent in the quiet contemplation of the living room, looking out over the garden they had both loved and tended to. The home felt full of John's presence, his ideals, and his love. It was here that Alice found peace and a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing she was living the life John had wished for her, filled with purpose and surrounded by a community that valued and respected her. As the seasons changed, Alice found herself reflecting on the journey she had undergone. It was marked by challenges and strife, but also by profound personal growth and the affirmation of her values. The adversity had taught her much about herself and the resilience of the human spirit. Alice often walked through the neighborhood, greeted warmly by neighbors and friends. Her story had inspired others to stand up for themselves and to support those in their community facing similar battles. She was no longer just Alice. She had become a pillar of strength and a beacon of justice in her community. In the quiet of her home, surrounded by memories and the legacy of a love that had stood the test of time and conflict, Alice felt a deep connection to John. She spoke to him often, telling him about her day, her plans, and how the community was thriving. "We did it, John," she would say with a soft smile, looking around at the home they had built together. "We really did." Her life was a testament to their love and to the enduring power of standing up for what is right. Alice lived each day with a renewed sense of purpose, grateful for the time she had with John and for the future they had secured together, even in his absence. Her story was one of love, loss, and ultimately, triumph, a reminder that even in the darkest times there is a light that justice and love can bring. Joys and meaningful activities. She took long walks in the neighborhood, joined a local book club, and even started a small garden project with other residents. Her home had become a hub of warmth and community spirit. Alice also began to volunteer at a local community center, teaching art classes to children. She found joy in their creativity and unfiltered enthusiasm, which reminded her of the simple pleasures in life that she had overlooked during her legal struggles. Her relationship with her colleagues deepened, and they often visited her home for dinner parties and game nights. These gatherings were filled with laughter and stories, a stark contrast to the solitude and tension of the past year. Alice cherished these moments, grateful for the support system that had stood by her through everything. In the evenings, Alice would sit in her renovated living room, now adorned with paintings and photographs that celebrated her and John's life together. The room, once a site of solitude and reflection, had transformed into a vibrant space where new memories were made. One weekend, Alice organized a neighborhood picnic in the park where she and John had spent many happy afternoons. It was a beautiful day, and the community came together to share food, play games, and enjoy the outdoors. As Alice watched children running around and adults chatting happily, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was what John had wanted, for her to be happy and surrounded by a community that cared. As the picnic wound down, Alice took a moment to sit on their favorite bench by the lake. She looked out over the water, the surface shimmering under the setting sun, and spoke to John in her heart. "We did it," she thought. "We've built something beautiful here, not just in our home but in our community." Back at home, Alice continued her evening routine, now a comforting ritual. She would make a cup of tea, check on her plants, and sometimes just stand in the doorway looking out at the quiet street, feeling safe and content. The legal battles and the conflict with John's family had taught her much about resilience and the importance of community. She realized that life was not about the challenges that confront us, but about how we respond to them and who we become in the process. Now, with each new day, Alice felt more like herself than she had in a long time. The house was no longer just a structure of walls and windows. It was a home filled with love, memories, and the promise of new beginnings. She had not only preserved John's legacy, but had also built her own, rooted in kindness, resilience, and community. As she prepared for another day, Alice felt a deep connection to everything around her. The challenges of the past had given way to a life rich with purpose and joy. She knew that whatever the future held, she was ready to meet it with the same strength and grace that had guided her through her darkest times. Alice's story was one of overcoming, healing, and ultimately thriving in the embrace of a community that had become her extended family. But also filled with profound rituals each morning, as she meticulously tended to the garden John had adored, carefully watering the plants they had nurtured together. The garden thrived under her care, a vivid tapestry of colors that seemed to echo his presence. The scent of blooming lavender and jasmine filled the air, and the melody of bird songs brought a sense of tranquility that Alice cherished. After her morning rituals, Alice often settled in the living room, where a simple portrait of John rested on the mantel, his smile bright and sincere, just as she remembered him. While sipping her tea, she spoke to him as she had vowed. "Good morning, John," she whispered gently, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "The garden's looking wonderful today. You'd be so proud. I've finally got the roses to bloom." These conversations, though silent on his end, had become a cornerstone of her healing, feeling his presence as if his love still lingered in the walls of the home they had created together. Alice had resumed her work at the local clinic, finding solace in assisting others. Her colleagues were thrilled to have her back, and many patients seemed to recognize her kindness and resilience. An elderly woman, a regular at the clinic, once took Alice's hand and said, "Dear, your smile is so comforting. It feels just like a hug." That moment moved Alice to tears, reminding her that even amid grief, she still had much to offer. She started volunteering again at community centers, activities she and John had engaged in during the early days of their marriage, whether it was organizing food drives or mentoring young people. Alice found that giving back filled the voids in her heart. Her efforts did not go unnoticed. Inspired by her story and resilience, some neighbors proposed starting a community initiative in John's memory. Quickly, the idea blossomed, and Alice found herself spearheading the John Thompson Memorial Fund, a program designed to support individuals facing discrimination and injustice. The fund provided financial aid, legal resources, and emotional support, ensuring that John's legacy lived on in a manner that reflected his values. The fund was an immediate success, thanks to Alice's relentless dedication and the community's support. Donations flowed in from individuals moved by her determination, including local businesses and some of John's former colleagues. It was a tribute to the kind of man John had been and the life he and Alice had built together. On the first anniversary of the court victory, the community gathered in the park to celebrate the official launch of the Memorial Fund. Alice, standing at the podium with her heart swelling with pride, addressed the crowd. "When John and I moved to this neighborhood, we envisioned a life filled with love, kindness, and fairness," she began, her voice firm yet imbued with emotion. "Yes, we encountered challenges, but we also received incredible support from many of you. This fund is our way of giving back, to help others find strength in adversity. I know John would be proud of what we're building together." The crowd's applause filled the park, and Alice felt an overwhelming sense of hope, not just for herself but for the future she was helping to shape. As the event concluded and attendees began to leave, Alice took a quiet moment for herself by the lake. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the water, and she closed her eyes, allowing the peaceful sounds of nature to envelop her. "I hope you can see this, John," she whispered. "I hope you know how much you're still loved." The gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and Alice took it as a sign, a reminder that John's spirit would always be with her, no matter where life took her. That evening, back at home, Alice sat in the living room, now a sanctuary of quiet comfort. The walls, once too silent, now resonated with the warmth of new memories and possibilities. She opened her journal, a habit she had developed during her time of healing, and began to write. "This year I've learned about love, loss, and resilience, about the power of community and the strength we find within ourselves when faced with no other choice. This house is more than just a structure. It's a testament to what John and I shared, to the life we built together, and to the future I am now creating." As night deepened, Alice set her pen down, glanced at John's photograph, and softly said, "Good night, John. I'll see you in the morning." The house was quiet, but no longer empty. It was filled with love, hope, and the indomitable spirit of a woman who had faced darkness and found her way back to light. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. If you enjoyed the video, share it with your friends and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to check out more of our videos. We'd love to have you join us on this journey.